about an enterprise that was founded with humble beginnings and grew into an institution. Sloan Paper Company was established by Solomon LeProd Sloan, receiving its charter on June the 25th, 1918, during World War I. It was located in one unit of a joint warehouse building at 18 Central Avenue, Atlanta, Georgia. The building was 5 stories high, plus a basement, and was partitioned into units approximately 20 feet wide and 100 feet deep. This building was between Wall and Alabama Streets and in the area where Underground Atlanta is now. There was a freight elevator with a lift capacity of 700 pounds and could accommodate 1 case of paper at the time. In those days, all grades of paper were packed in wooden cases, the weight of which were approximately 600 pounds. There was no railroad siding, and all paper had to be unloaded from boxcars at a public team track and hauled by a dray to the warehouse. Consequently, commerce moved at a snail's pace compared to today's standards. Third, the company began operation with franchise distributorships from Champion Paper Company, Strathmore Paper Company, Miller's Falls Paper Company, Eastern Corporation, U.S. Envelope Company, International Paper Company. Business was good due to wartime shortages, and this condition continued through 1919. The year 1919 witnessed the enactment of the 18th Amendment, that is, Prohibition, and the country remained legally dry until repeal in 1933. Sloan had sales for the first business year, ending June 30, 1919, of $178,049, and net profit after taxes of $15,765. By the way, the Dow Jones average at the end of 1919 was 107.23. On September 30, 1919, L.A. Menzel, who would be 97 years young on August 1, 1987, joined the still youthful company. Lou Menzel, for over 40 years, was responsible for our out-of-town sales, and he made a significant contribution to the success of the organization. His territory consisted of Georgia, Alabama, Tennessee, Mississippi, Florida, South Carolina, North Carolina. By the beginning of 1920, a recession set in and grew progressively worse. It ended by the middle of 1921. But, unfortunately, during this period, prices dropped 40%, resulting in a devastation of inventory values. Sales for the year for Sloan, ending June 30, 1920, amounted to $354,895, with a net profit of $17,533. During 1920, we were granted the S.D. Warren franchise. And by the way, the population of Metro Atlanta in 1920 was 367,174. By the end of March 1922, Sloan was in serious financial condition. The mills we represented did not want Sloan to fail, if at all possible, so they appointed a creditors committee consisting of, among others, Mr. Horace Moses, president of Strathmore Paper Company, and Mr. Eddie Gray of the S.D. Warren Company, to attempt to work out a plan and program for paying off the indebtedness. Mr. Gray had met Mr. James L. Wells, at that time manager of Whitaker Paper Company, and recommended him to the creditors as a man who he thought could work out Sloan's financial problems. Mr. Wells accepted their offer, and on January 1st, 1923, he came to Sloan as vice president, bringing with him Lewis L. Ferry. In 1922, Sloan was awarded the Beckett franchise, and Mr. S.M. Wood joined the company in Birmingham, Alabama. By the way, on March the 15th, 1922, WSB began broadcasting in Atlanta and was the first broadcasting station in the South. Mr. Earl Wheatley, sales manager for the company, among his other responsibilities, wrote several articles about paper for the monthly Chamber of Commerce publication, The City Builder, in 1922. When Mr. Wells came to Sloan in 1923, he started building an organization with an esprit de corps that in time would prove to be second to none. He selected well-qualified people for every position, assigned them multi-responsibilities, and promoted them as they performed. In May 1923, the country experienced another recession, which lasted until July 1924. After 2 years of net losses, the year ended June 30th, 1923, we had sales of $519,756 with a net profit of $13,741.11. In 1924, Mr. Wells became president and Mr. S.L. Sloan resigned. Also during this year, R.E. Carter joined the firm December the 15th, and Calvin Coolidge was elected president. When Mr. Wells came to Sloan Paper Company, he purchased 50% of the stock in the company. And at the time of Mr. Sloan's resignation, Mr. Wells purchased sufficient additional stock so that he, at that time, owned a controlling interest in the company. In 1923, Mr. T.L. Heineman, Sr. was employed in the accounting department, and after Mr. S.L. Sloan resigned, Mr. L.L. Ferry was elected a director of the company. At that time, the officers of the company were Mr. James L. Wells, president, Mr. William C. Russell, vice president, Mr. J. A. Krause, secretary, treasurer. The young company intended to grow, and for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 1925, our sales were $548,224 with a net profit of $11,359. By 1926, we had grown sufficiently to where we could not continue to operate in the limited space that we occupied at 18 Central Avenue, and the company moved to 543 Whitehall Street to a two-story building consisting of 27,000 square feet on a railroad siding with an alley alongside. Throughout the 20s and before Mr. Wells came to Sloan Paper Company, he had participated in many civic affairs. He was a member of the City Council of the City of Atlanta and remained in that capacity until he ran for mayor of Atlanta in 1936. 1926, at the annual stockholders meeting, Mr. John L. Sloan, a brother of S.L. Sloan, as well as Mr. L.A. Menzel, were elected to the board of directors. 1927 was an exciting year, not only for Sloan, but also for the city of Atlanta and the entire country. Charles A. Lindbergh made his famous solo flight on May the 20th across the Atlantic Ocean. The first talking picture in Atlanta was at the Metropolitan Theater, where the Eastern Airlines ticket office is now at the corner of Lucky and Broad Street. The movie was The Jazz Singer with Al Jolson. Another most important event occurred in 1927, and that was the invention of the Xerox process and patent by Chester Carlson. It was some 20 years later before the Xerox actually began to influence business in this country. And as you probably know, every day about 1 billion copies are made using the xerographic process, which was invented by Chester Carlson. And this business continues to grow every year. Our sales for the year ending June 30th, 1927, was $645,945 with a net profit of $17,823. 1928 business continued to be good. We qualified to do business in Birmingham on March the 15th. Herbert Hoover was elected president. Georgia Tech was undefeated in football, was invited to the Rose Bowl to play against the University of California on January 1st, 1929, and naturally defeated California. As stated, we began the year 1929 full of enthusiasm. Business was still good. Tech had won the Rose Bowl game. As of the end of the year, June 30th, our sales were $655,688 with a net profit of $21,594 before taxes. The prosperous, roaring 20s were beginning to come to an end with the beginning of this, with the stock market crash on October the 29th. The beginning of the year 1930 ushered in the era of the Great Depression, which lasted theoretically until Roosevelt was inaugurated in March of 1933. However, we really had a continued recession throughout the entire decade of the 30s. During 1930, the population of Metro Atlanta was 479,000. Sloan's sales ending June the 30th was $637,411, and our profit before taxes were $20,598. In 1930, Eastern Airlines and Delta Airlines began regular scheduled passenger service in and out of Atlanta. And our own Bobby Jones scored a grand slam in golf, winning the U.S. Amateur, the U.S. Open, the British Amateur, and the British Open tournaments. In December of 1930, Judy Hargraves joined the company, representing us in Chattanooga and surrounding cities in Tennessee and in North Georgia. In 1931, business conditions nationally and therefore almost naturally in the South deteriorated rapidly. And on June 30th, 1931, Sloan sales were $503,441, but there were considerable losses due to businesses going into bankruptcy, and our net profit ended up $1,651. 1932 started out rather rough for the company, inasmuch as early in January, the treasurer of the company advised he was short some $20,000 odd. The company had not paid off the indebtedness which we were attempting to wipe out, and this was quite a blow. However, Mr. Wells, together with the help of all of his loyal employees, was determined that we would overcome the difficulties. On January the 18th, 1932, Mr. T.L. Hyman Sr. was elected treasurer, and Mr. L.L. Ferry was elected secretary. Business, of course, continued to deteriorate, and our sales as of June 30th were $391,853, but we ended up with a net loss of $35,110. In 1932, the month of November, Franklin D. Roosevelt was elected President of the United States for the first time, and James R. Spinks became associated with the company. After Roosevelt was elected in November, the Dow Jones average began to climb from its low point during the year of 40. As the year 1933 began, the morale of the American people were at its lowest point. Unemployment was rampant. Banks were failing by the hundreds throughout the country, as well as businesses. Bread lines were in every city, and it was obvious when Roosevelt was inaugurated on March the 4th that it was going to be necessary that he take immediate action to restore the confidence of the American people. On March the 6th, all of the United States banks were ordered closed by the President. On March the 9th, Congress had been called in a special session, and during the 100 days of special session, it passed the New Deal legislation, which Roosevelt recommended be passed. In the ensuing days, confidence began to return to the American people. However, business was a long ways from returning to what it had been during the Roaring 20s. Sloan sales ending June 30th, 1933 were $309,909 with a net loss of $5,037. Roosevelt's legislation, which was known as the New Deal, began to provide jobs for a lot of people and help to restore the overall confidence and faith in themselves and the government. Business was slowly improving, and by June the 30th, 1934, Sloan sales were $391,346 with a net profit before taxes of $22,197. On June the 10th, 1934, Robert Chambers became associated with the company as office boy. In 1935, business remained about the same. It was a little harder to make profit. Our sales ending June 30th, 1935 were $414,384 with a net profit before taxes of $16,087. During this year, Margaret Mitchell published a novel, Gone with the Wind, and on August 14th, 1935, the Social Security Act was passed by Congress. In 1936, business conditions improved slightly. Mr. Wells, who had been a very civic-minded person, had served in city council for many years, ran for mayor of Atlanta, and was defeated by William B. Hartsfield, who served the city of Atlanta well for 25 years. During this year, the Spanish Civil War began. Sloan paid off its indebtedness, which had been approximately $200,000. It paid its first dividend on its common stock and initiated a bonus plan. In November, Franklin Roosevelt was elected to a second term, taking every state in the Union except Maine and Vermont. His opponent was Alf Landon from the state of Kansas. The year 1937 was quite important for Sloan Paper Company and the paper industry in general. Sloan Paper Company, at the beginning of the year, had salesman Mr. L.A. Munsell traveling the territory in Georgia, Mr. S.M. Wood in Birmingham and parts of Alabama, Joe Mills, whom we had employed, represented us in Montgomery. Judy Hargraves represented the company in Chattanooga and North Georgia. Our city salesmen were L. Ferry, John L. Sloan, who was a brother of the founder of the company, but who owned only a small interest, John Clayton, and Mr. Wells had 3 accounts that he called on. Munsell traveled the Georgia territory. Warehouse in Atlanta was operated and managed by James R. Spinks. The oil department was headed by R.E. Carter and assisted by R.M. Chambers. Red Carter ordered all the paper, answered all telephone calls except those which were handled by his assistant. He deducted all of the sales charges. He carried on all the dictation with the paper mills. He priced all the charges. And the billing was done by our one female employee who, in addition to the billing, took the dictation from all salesmen, as well as Mr. Wells, and the credit department, headed up by the treasurer, Mr. Heineman, who was assisted by the bookkeeper, Nick Shropshire. In August, Mr. John Sloan died suddenly, and his accounts were assigned to Red Carter. His job in the art department was then assigned to his assistant, Bob Chambers. During this year, we purchased property at Fair and Castleberry Streets, which had on it a warehouse building which leaked, and we stored the warehouse newsprint, but we had to shuffle it from one place to another to keep it from getting wet. During this year, an invention took place by Chester Carlson, who was the developer of xerographic paper. It took 21 years of tedious work and effort before a truly usable xerographic copier was produced. But today, 50 years after his invention, the use of copies coming from the xerographic process amounts to about 1 billion copies a day. And if all that paper were a continuous roll, it would stretch 157,828 miles, enough to wrap around the earth 6 times. Think what that process has done for the paper business. Copiers have spawned whole new industries. And one good example is the quick print shop. The use of copiers keeps growing, and according to Xerox Corporation, about 60% to 70% of all copies are copies of copies. This process has surely contributed materially to an increase in our business. In 1938, in Europe, war clouds were spreading fast and speedy. On March the 12th, Hitler marched into Austria and occupied the nation within 3 days without firing a shot. In September, a pact was signed at Munich between Germany, Great Britain, France, and Italy that was supposed to be peace in our time. Of course, it allowed a substantial slice of Czechoslovakia to be taken over by Germany. On June the 28th, a national minimum wage law was enacted by Congress, mandating a minimum hourly wage of 30 cents with 1 1/2 times for any work over 40 hours. On March the 19th, Wyndham Mitchum was employed, and on October the 22nd, Raymond Pollitt joined the company. In 1939, developments were continuing to take place that indicated war in Europe was likely. On August the 20th, announcement came that the Soviet Union and Germany had concluded a non-aggression pact. On September 1st, Hitler invades Poland and World War II is begun. Great Britain and France, adhering to their treaty with Poland, declared war on Germany. David Mitchell's book Gone with the Wind was made into a movie, and it premiered in Atlanta at the Lowe's Grand Theater. And Clark Gable as Rhett Butler and Vivian Leigh as Scarlett O'Hara. The premiere was held in Atlanta in December of 1939. This proved to be a successful social event of momentous portent. As the year ended, business, of course, had picked up due to the war in Europe. Unemployment had dropped tremendously. In 1940, March the 1st, Thomas J. Donaldson Jr. became associated with the company, and on March the 4th, 1940, Richard H. Johnson was employed. During this year, the population of Metro Atlanta was 558,842. Our sales were $508,111, and our profit before taxes was $19,356. For the year ending June 30th. In January, R.M. Chambers was elected a member of the board of directors. Roosevelt was elected to an unprecedented third term after France had surrendered to Germany in June. The war situation was getting worse and was affecting potentially the interests of the United States. In the election for mayor this year, Hartsfield was defeated by Roy LaCroix, who served only a few months because when the United States became involved in the war, he resigned and entered the armed services. Hartsfield was then re-elected and continued to serve for many years. Winston Churchill, Minister of Great Britain, when things were at a very low ebb for that country, and he offered the British people, quote, blood, toil, tears, and sweat. On June the 22nd, 1941, Hitler proved to the rest of the world how much he could be trusted with any kind of treaty with another country. On that morning, the German forces attacked the Soviet Union with planes and troops. This move on the part of Hitler was to prove subsequently to be one of his many serious mistakes. On December 7th, Japan bombed Pearl Harbor in a surprise attack and inflicted devastating damages to our naval forces and air force at that base. The United States was now in World War II. On March 21st, 1942, T.J. Donaldson, Jr. was elected a director and assistant treasurer of the company. All prices, profits, wages were frozen. Gasoline, sugar, shoes, ties were rationed, and a wartime economy was now in place. This would be the situation for the duration. And during 1942, Thomas J. Donaldson, Jr., James R. Spinks, Raymond N. Pollitt, Richard H. Johnson, Russell Williamson, and Barry Loomis all entered the armed services for the duration. WACS WACS became the first U.S. women soldiers, and American troops land in North Africa during 1942. At the end of the football season, the University of Georgia had won the Southeastern Conference championship and was invited to play in the Rose Bowl on January 2nd, 1943, playing University of California at Los Angeles. And needless to say, the boys from Athens were victorious. On January 23rd, 1943, Mr. James L. Wells was elected chairman of the board. L.L. Ferry was elected president. L.A. Menzel vice president. R.E. Carter vice president. T.L. Heinemann treasurer. And R.M. Chambers secretary. On July 1st, 1943, Guy Hitch was employed as a city salesman. Stalin, Roosevelt, and Churchill confer at Tehran, and Oklahoma is Broadway's big hit. 1944, Dwight D. Eisenhower was named Allied Supreme Commander, and in June, the Allies invade Normandy on D-Day. And in November, Roosevelt is elected to an unprecedented fourth term. On April the 12th, 1945, President Roosevelt dies at Warm Springs, Georgia, of cerebral hemorrhage, just 24 days before Germany surrenders unconditionally to the Allies and Russia. Harry Truman is immediately sworn in to succeed Roosevelt as president. On May 6th, Germany surrenders unconditionally to the Allies and Russia. In August, the United States drops atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan, and World War II comes to an end with a surrender unconditionally by Japan. The United Nations is founded, and all of those men in the armed services from Sloan Paper Company returned home safe. Shortly after his return home from the war, Raymond Pollitt is transferred to our Birmingham Division. 1946, business is very good due to pent-up demand and wartime shortages, and remains good for the next several years. Our sales as of June 30th were $1,046,224, and of course was the first time that the company had ever had sales of as much as $1 million in 1 year. Our net profit at that point was $55,143 before taxes. On March the 25th, Clarence Merritt was employed, and on July the 22nd, Russell Williamson was anointed a permanent employee. On December the 7th, a very tragic event occurred for the city of Atlanta, in which the Wyckoff Hotel, located at Ellis and Peachtree Street, experienced a severe fire, and 119 people lost their lives as a result of this tragedy. State legislation greatly expanded and strengthened the state fire code and inspired stricter codes throughout other cities in the nation. In 1947, business remains very good due to still unfilled needs and shortages. We were on allotment with all the mills with In 1948, business continued to be good. WSB began the South's first regular telecasting. Harry Truman was elected for a full 4-year term. The board of directors of Sloan authorized the lease of a warehouse at 3013 Avenue B, the letter B, South in Birmingham for 5 years, beginning on October 1st and extending through September 30th, 1953. In 1949, Atlanta, to meet traffic problems, started construction of a north-south limited access high-speed throughway. Period. Passage of the Federal Interstate Highway Act some 6 years later boosted an expressway program throughout the area. And some 8 years later, the interstate interchange near the capital of the state connected north, south, east, and west legs and a perimeter road around the city to take some of the load. But traffic grew more and more. So in 1964, 5-county area, people approved a constitutional amendment to provide for an area-wide transit system. Because of growth in the areas outside the city limits of Atlanta, which demanded services, which the county and city were trying to furnish, resulted in the legislature establishing a commission to study the situation, which resulted in the plan of improvement voted on by the people. Areas adjacent to the city were taken in, and the population of the city was increased by 100,000. And by January 1st, 1952, 1952, the area of the corporate limits of the city were increased from 37 square miles to 118 square miles. In October, Walter Ed Cox joined the Sloan Paper Company in Birmingham. By October 1949, the business contraction, which had existed for about 1 year, ended, and business conditions improved. Mary Martin triumphs in the play South Pacific on Broadway. The communists under Mao Zedong established the People's Republic of China, and the bikini makes its debut in the United States. In 1950, North Korea invaded South Korea, and the United States committed troops. Richard Johnson and Clarence Merritt re-entered the Navy. T.L. Heinemann dies, and Thomas J. Donaldson, Jr. is elected treasurer to succeed him. The population of Metro Atlanta is 726,989. On June the 30th, Sloan's sales were $1,779,813, with a net profit of $57,898 before taxes. As a result of the Korean War, the United States again embarked upon a wartime effort. Prices and salaries and profits were frozen, and products, both paper and others, were on allotment again. 1951, General Douglas MacArthur, who was in charge of our forces in the Korean War, was fired by President Harry Truman for what Truman called insubordination. In February, Mark Huguenin was employed by the Sloan Paper Company, and after working in the warehouse and in the oil department for several years and in sales, he was transferred to our Chattanooga branch to help expand our operation and increase our sales. He was named manager of the branch on, and leave the date blank, please, 1952. Business remained good due somewhat to the Korean War. The first hydrogen bomb test obliterated a Pacific island. Dwight D. Eisenhower was elected president, along with Richard Nixon as vice president, defeating Adlai Stevenson, Democratic nominee. November 30th, 1954, Mr. Wells dies, and Mr. Ferry becomes the chief executive officer as well as president. He stated shortly thereafter that Mr. Munsell would be in complete charge of out-of-town sales, Mr. Carter in charge of Atlanta sales, Raymond Pollard, Vice President and Manager of our Birmingham Division, be in charge of Alabama sales, Mark T. Huguenin, Manager of our Chattanooga Division, Tom Donaldson, Treasurer, in complete charge of credits, Bob Chambers continued as Secretary. On January 3rd, 1955, John Ford was employed, and on January 16th, Bobby Gresham joined the company. S.M. Wood in our Birmingham division retires after 33 years with the company. Recognizing that we were fast outgrowing our facility on Whitehall Street, in September, we acquired 3.4 acres of land from the Atlantic Coast Railroad, located on Wheeler Street, bounded by Chestnut Street and Bedford Streets. Contracted with R.H. Hardin Company to construct a 50,000 square foot office and warehouse. 1956, business continued to be good. On April the 1st, we moved into our new facility at 781 Wheeler Street. On May the 14th, Ben Jordan became associated with the company. In November, Eisenhower and Richard Nixon were re-elected president and vice president. An interstate highway system was approved by Congress. A series of dams along the Chattahoochee River were completed. The Buford Dam, finished in 1956, provided for Lake Lanier recreational area, 540 miles of shoreline, and provided a reservoir that would provide fresh water needs for a population of 2 million people. The season's top Broadway musical is My Fair Lady. 1957 business continues to be good until the end of the summer, when we had a slight recession. On October the 4th, Russia launched the first satellite known as Sputnik 1, and later in the month, the Dow Jones Industrial Average dropped to 419.79 and 0.79. In September 1958, Miss Fitch was employed. Business began to improve and continued to do so until 1960. In February 1959, Sloan had its first stock split which was 10-for-1 shares. Castro and his guerrillas overthrew the Batista regime in Cuba, and during this year, the first truly usable xerographic copier was produced. On August the 1st, Thomas H. Smallshoff was employed to represent the company in Columbus, Georgia, and in the surrounding cities. On December 31st, the Dow Jones average closed at 679.36. On January 3rd, 1959, Alaska was admitted to the Union as the 49th state, and on August the 21st, Hawaii was admitted as the 50th state. On January 20th, 1960, Coley L. Evans, Jr. became associated with the company. During the year, Russell Williamson was transferred from Birmingham back to Atlanta and started our sales promotion division. During this year, Ivan Allen Jr., president of the Chamber of Commerce, called for a 3-year Forward Atlanta program and set forth some of his ideas, which were for the construction of a stadium, a completion of the expressway system, the inauguration of a rapid transit system, an auditorium coliseum, and a retention of Atlanta's public school system. The population of Metro Atlanta was now 1,017,008 people. Sloan sales for the fiscal year ending June the 30th were $4,324,000, and our net profit after taxes was $100,000. On August the 13th, 1960, at our annual meeting, Mark Huguenin, Russell Williamson, Richard H. Johnson, Clarence Merritt were all elected to the board of directors. And the board of directors on that date elected L.L. Ferry, chairman of the board, R.E. Carter, president, R.M. Chambers, executive vice president, W.E. Mitchum, secretary, and Thomas J. Donaldson, Jr., treasurer. In November 1960, John F. Kennedy was elected president and Lyndon Johnson vice president of the United States. In 1961, Ivan Allen was elected mayor of Atlanta to succeed the retiring Mayor William B. Hartsfield. As a result of the cooperation of citizens and business leaders with the city government, all of the projects of Forward Atlanta, which had been proposed by Ivan Allen when he was president of the Chamber of Commerce, became a reality, demonstrating what good, strong leadership can accomplish. In John F. Kennedy's inaugural address, he called for the United States sending a man to the moon before the end of the decade. And as they start towards accomplishing this feat, we launched our first American into space, Alan Shepard, before the end of the year. Atlanta, through the foresight of its leaders, had recognized early what the future of aviation would mean to the city. So, at the airport, they built adequate runways. And the Atlanta airport became the fifth busiest in the nation. In 1961, a $20 million air terminal was completed. On February the 8th, 1962, James L. Byrd is employed. On February 20th, John Glenn becomes the first American to orbit the Earth. On October 1st, Barney Moore becomes associated with the company, and on September 10th, Paul Schwarzenegger is employed. Our sales for the year ending June 30th, 1962 were $5,089,000, and our net profit after taxes were $124,000. During October the 22nd to November 2nd, the Soviet missiles in Cuba created a crisis between the United States and Russia, and there was a confrontation between the two great powers. Fortunately for the peace of the world, Russia decided to withdraw their missiles from Cuba. In 1963, President Kennedy is assassinated in Dallas, Texas, and Lyndon Johnson succeeds him as president. In 1964, Lyndon Johnson campaigned for a great society in running against Senator Goldwater for the 1964 presidential election, and Johnson defeats Goldwater in a landslide. In 1964, the National Paper Trade Association offered a regional seminar on profit improvement for members The one in the South was held in New Orleans, and Tom Johnson and Bob Chambers attended this meeting where the most important subject was how to improve profitability by means of a budget. As a result of this meeting, Tom Johnson prepared a budget for the company, which was placed into effect on January the 1st, at which time it was planned to demonstrate to top management that we could improve our profitability tremendously because of the results that came from the budget beginning with our fiscal year of July 1st, 1965. The company began operation on a budget which, of course, has been in effect since. On January the 25th, 1965, Howard Olson joined the Sloan Paper Company. On May the 20th, R.E. Carter was named chairman of the board and chief executive officer, R.M. Chambers president, R.N. Pollard first vice president, W. Mitchum executive vice president, E.R. Williamson vice president, advertising and sales promotion, C.H. Merritt secretary, Thomas J. Donaldson treasurer, and J. Lawrence Kilgore assistant treasurer. Our sales for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 1965 was $6,214,000, and our net profit after taxes was $156,000. Because of the growth of the company, it was necessary for the Atlanta warehouse to be expanded, and on July 1st, 1965, construction began on a 28,000 square foot addition, which we were able to occupy by the early part of 1966. In 1965, astronaut Ed White walks in space. On March the 1st, 1966, we opened a branch in Columbus, Georgia, with a warehouse of 8,000 square feet located at 1314 Jacqueline Drive in the Mary Acres Industrial Park. Our manager was and is Thomas Smallshoff. He had one salesman beside himself, Charles McLean, and he was assisted in operating the warehouse by Fred Carden, who remains on board. On November 1st, we opened our Huntsville warehouse with Bob Gladden as manager, assisted by Cecil Ray. For the year ending June 30, 1966, was $7,274,000, and our net profit after taxes was $201,000. On July the 1st, 1966, Brian Halsey became associated with the company. During this year, the air war in Vietnam was escalated. At this point, it might be of some interest to learn of the effects and results of our having adopted a budget as of July 1st, 1965. Our gross trading margin percentage on sales as of June 30th, 1964 were 20.8%, and our net profit on sales was 2.1%. As of June 30th, 1965, after adopting the budget for only 6 months, our gross trade margin percentage was 21.4% on sales, and our net profit on sales was 2.5%. In 1966, June 30th, our gross trade margin percentage was 22.2%, and our net profit on sales was 2.76%. On June 30th, 1967, our gross trade margin was 23.3%, and our net profit on sales remained at 2.76%. In 1971, our gross trade margin percentage was 24.9%, and our net profit on sales was 3%. So, in 1964, when our sales were $5,512,000 and our net profit was $114,000, by 1966, we had increased our sales 31% to $7,274,000. However, we increased our net profit from $114,000 to $201,000, which was an increase of 77% over the 1964 figure. One example of the fruits of the budget. 1867, Israel defeats the Arabs in a 6-day war. 3 United States astronauts die when the capsule catches fire on a launch pad, and Chuck Walton becomes associated with the company. 1968, Jackie Kennedy, widow of John F. Kennedy, marries Aristotle Onassis. Robert F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr. are assassinated. Richard Nixon is elected President of the United States. Horace Ramey and Ron A. join the company. And R.E. Carter retires as chairman of the company after 44 years of service, and is succeeded by Bob Chambers. 1968, we embarked on our first phase of computerization by entering into a 3-year contract with UNIVAC. On January 1st, 1969, we began operation in Montgomery, Alabama, after having purchased the Alabama Paper Company. In May, we actually started our computer operation on our UNIVAC 9200 series. In June, Sloan split its stock again 10-for-1. this being the second 10-for-1 stock split. United States astronauts Armstrong and Aldrin land on the moon, bring out the hope and prediction of President John F. Kennedy. 1970, it was necessary for us to add an addition to the Atlanta front office space and to our warehouse receiving department. In February, Sloan employed in Wyndham, Branham, Cashin, and Duval as auditors, succeeding Arthur Anderson and Company. Our sales ending June 30th were $10,880,000. Our net profit was $308,790. Rob Wilson, Bob Hester, and Sam Kraft became associated with the company. The population of Metro Atlanta was now 1,434,676. 1971, Gene Bell and Jimmy Elder became associated with the company. In May, we extended our contract with Univac for 5 more years for our data processing department. On July the 1st, we initiated a new department in the company operating in the Atlanta market referred to as Business Paper Department under the direction of Coley Evans. 1972, Bill Davis in Chattanooga, Harvey Reed in Atlanta, Jerry Wertheimer, Pam Smith, and Alan Askew, as well as Jack Wine and Louis Young, also in Atlanta, joined the firm. During this year, we finally experienced a $1 million sales month. In fact, during the fiscal year ending June 30th, 1972, we had 3 $1 million months, March, May, and June. A new department was established under the direction of Ben Jordan to service silkscreen, sign shop, and display manufacturers in the southeast United States. In May, Clarence Merritt was elected Vice President of Sales and Coley Evans, Secretary of the company. In the spring of 1972, Barney Moore, who at that time was manager of the Atlanta warehouse, established a night operation in the warehouse using Gene Bell and several of his Georgia Tech fraternity brothers as a nucleus for this operation. Also, during this year, we increased our warehouse space in Columbus by 50%, bringing a total of a little less than 12,000 square feet. 1973, Spiro Agnew resigns as Vice President of the United States after being charged with income tax evasion. On August 11th, the Board of Directors passed a resolution making it the responsibility of the Board to ascertain that a budget be prepared by the Treasury to be operative and effective on the first business day of each new fiscal year. In December, Bobby Gresham is named manager of the Atlanta Art Department, succeeding Barney Moore, who is transferred into outside sales effective the first of the year 1974. Also, we cannot leave 1973 without mentioning that the Vietnam Peace Pact was signed in Paris on January the 27th. And during this year, the Watergate hearings were initiated with Senator Sam Ervin of North Carolina presiding. 1974, Ron Neal, Eddie Jackson, and Ralph Wade are employed by the company. Jim Spinks retires in February. On May 10th, Ben Jordan is elected to the Board of Directors. R.M. Chambers named Chairman of the Board. W.E. Mitchum, Vice Chairman of the Board. R.N. Pollard, Vice Chairman of the Board. Clarence Merritt, President. Coley Evans, Executive Vice President. Russell Williamson, Vice President, Advertising and Sales Promotion. James L. Bird, Junior Secretary. T.J. Donaldson, Junior Treasurer. J.L. Kilgore, Assistant Treasurer. Our sales as of June 30, 1974 was $17,906,000. Our gross trading margin percentage was 25.6%, and our net profit on sales was 4%. On August 9th, President Nixon resigns as a result of Watergate, and in December, the Dow Jones Industrial Average dropped to 577.6. During this year, we purchased our present warehouse on a 7.5 acre tract of land at the corner of Oak Cliff and North Crest Roads in Doraville, DeKalb County, Georgia. The warehouses consisted of 120,000 square feet with 30-foot ceilings. We constructed an office building between and connected with the two standing warehouses. The office building was not completed until late in 1975. On February 14, 1975, Brian Halsey is appointed Director of Purchasing. On On August the 4th, Sloan opened a warehouse in Jackson, Mississippi, under the management of Bob Hester, who was transferred from our Birmingham division. It was located at 2572 Bailey Avenue with a total staff of 4 employees and 5,000 square feet of warehouse space. Janelle Sarrett, who is today our office manager in Jackson, was added to the staff on August 18th. Incidentally, we moved to our present location at 300 Commerce Park Drive with a warehouse space of 10,000 square feet in November 1977. After a fire in December 1979 and 2 moves, Sloan has acquired 15,000 square feet of warehouse and presently employs 16 on its sales, office, and warehouse staff. Gene Bell, the present manager, came to Jackson from Atlanta in July 1978. He is ably assisted by Tom Gilbert and Brian Verlander. And in the office, Eva Norton. Together, they anticipate increasing sales and expansion in the Mississippi and Louisiana area. After months of planning and preparation and a gigantic cooperative effort on the part of everyone in the Atlanta division, we moved our inventory, office furniture, equipment, and supplies from Wheeler Street to Doraville during the week following Christmas, and on January 2nd, 1976, we were operating out of our present location. The unselfish, dedicated participation by everyone demonstrates the type of people in the Sloan organization. In the early part of 1976, Jay Rogers and Ted Thrash joined the company. After months of study, investigation, and planning, the company established its first mini store, that's MINI store, to be called the Paper Shop, and the first one was located at 1209 Techwood Drive, adjacent to States 75 and 85. The building consisted of 3,000 square feet, and our lease began on February 1st, 1976. Due to expressway expansion, it was necessary to move this shop from Techwood Drive to 357 Armour Drive in July of 1977. We opened our second paper shop in the north corner of our 3587 Oak Cliff Road building in May of 1976, and this unit was 5,000 square feet. Under the guidance